Good afternoon, YouTube. This is Chuck, and it's Sunday, February 4th, 2024, and it's about mid-afternoon, and started off real cloudy and gloomy this morning, and that's all moved off now, and got blue sky and bright sunshine, and hopefully I got this sitting so the light's right, because I can't really tell. That light's a little bit harsh, but anyway, as you can tell, I'm coming to you from the van, and got another story for you today, and it's going to be a firefighter story, and it's going to be about carbon monoxide. It's actually a collection of stories, and what triggered that is on the morning news. There's talk about an incident that happened down in Scottsdale, in the Metro Phoenix area, and of course, probably all of you know that Scottsdale is kind of an affluent suburb of the Metro Phoenix area. And anyway, an elderly couple was found in their home, and they're suffering from the effects of carbon monoxide poisoning, and they're both transported to the hospital in critical condition. And what turned out to happen was they found out that their car in the garage was running. And I can see where that could happen, because modern cars, especially the more expensive ones, a lot of them are really, really quiet, and if you pull it in the garage, and you might not even realize you didn't shut it off. And so their car ended up running in the garage and ended up apparently poisoning them. They were found in their beds by a neighbor who went to check on them. And of course the paramedics were called and got transported. But that I've been thinking about the carbon monoxide thing for a while. And way back when I first started the channel and first started doing firefighter stories, one of the first ones I did was about a carbon monoxide related incident. And of course that was real early in the channel, and it didn't get a lot of traction. So I'm going to, in the description of the video, I'll put a link to that one. And the title of it is a life lost and a life saved. And this one's going to kind of expand on that. I'm not going to tell the same story again, but a lot of people, this is a mountain community, and it gets kind of cold here and in the wintertime. And so when I was fire chief, one of the things I would do every fall when people started lighting up their heaters for the season is, as part of our training, I would give our troops a carbon monoxide refresher. And it seemed like every season we'd get some carbon monoxide related calls. And some of the guys, after 3 or 4 years of getting these every fall, they'd kind of grown a little bit every time they knew that was what was going to be up on the docket. But it's important enough that I thought they needed a refresher on it. And, we do a lot of training and stuff that we already know how to do, just to make sure we stay sharp at it. And, it doesn't take much to squirt water, but it does take a whole lot to make sure that you get it right every time. And we have an old saying is, don't train till you get it right, train till you can't get it wrong. And that's kind of what these refresher classes were. And there's a whole bunch of medical stuff that we had to have refresher classes every year, and CPR was one that it was kind of interesting. Sometimes we'd have CPR instructors come in to give us our annual CPR, or every 2 years, I guess, we had to do a CPR refresher. And quite often they'd be people that were educators, and they'd never worked in the field, and they'd never done CPR on a real person in their life. And most of our guys, at some point during the course of the previous year, they'd actually done CPR on somebody. So here we had somebody that had never done it, that was trying to train people who had done it before. And we used to always, we always had things to say about that, being kind of type A personalities like firefighters mostly are. But that's not what my story is today. My story is today, and I've got 2 or 3 of them, and I don't even know how many I'm going to say. It just depends on how long I feel like talking and how it goes. But the first story I want to tell you happened, way back, sometime in the early 80s. And we only had one guy on shift, and that one full-time shift person would be backed up by 3 paid-on calls on what we called squad duty. And they wouldn't necessarily be at the station. They would respond and meet the truck at the scene. But I had one on-duty paid firefighter, and that individual would be he'd be on duty at the station, regular 24-hour firefighter shift, and then the crew would just meet him on the scene wherever the call was at. And if the call was someplace out of town, we'd wait a couple minutes and let the crew get to the station so they could ride as a unit. But anyway, it'd been probably not over a week or so after I'd given my annual carbon monoxide refresher, and they got our medical squad got dispatched out to a house in the north part of town and for a report of an ill person. Well, one of the things we'd always tell them was if you go on during heating season, and if you go on an ill person call and you find out the whole family's sick with the same symptoms, there's a pretty good chance it's going to be some carbon monoxide related in that. And so anyway, our shift guy was captain, and he was a pretty sharp dude. And so they responded out there, and they no sooner got on the scene and they called back and they said they had multiple patients, carbon monoxide exposure, and they upgraded the assignment to a full first alarm structure fire assignment. And so that basically tripped all the pagers and called out all the volunteers, and we went out there with 3 engine companies and support units and chiefs and everything else. Well, we got out there, and I was the duty chief that night. And so I responded. I had my car, of course, at my house, and I responded direct. And I got there, and the squad crew there, they had a family of 6 all outside. It was about probably 20-degree weather, and they had them all outside laying on the front lawn. Well, what had happened is my captain, when he got there, the minute when he opened up the door and walked inside, he immediately suspected bad furnace. And so they immediately upgraded the assignment and removed everybody to get them some fresh air. They only carried enough oxygen equipment on the vehicle for 2 patients, and so part of the reason why they called everybody else out was to make sure we had plenty of oxygen tanks and apparatus and stuff so we could treat everybody at the same time. And we ended up transporting the whole family of 6 people to the hospital, and sure enough, they were experiencing the effects of carbon monoxide exposure. Now, would that captain have picked up on that if he hadn't had the refresher class a week prior? The answer to that is probably yes, because he's a pretty sharp guy. But I'm sure that having that carbon monoxide refresher didn't hurt anything as far as that goes. Interesting sidebar in that particular story is that back in those days, in order to get to determine for sure whether there was carbon monoxide exposure involved, you have to do a blood test called a carboxyhemoglobin test. And back in those days, our hospital wasn't even equipped to do that, and they had to send blood samples by courier down to the Metro Phoenix area to a lab with better equipment in order even to determine the carboxyhemoglobin level. Now, if you see on TV, and if anytime somebody has carbon monoxide exposure, they turn kind of a tomato soup orange color and reddish orange color, and is that real? Yeah, it is. But usually by the time you get that bad, you're probably not going to survive. That's a late stage. So what does carbon monoxide do anyway? Well, basically, your blood has receptors for oxygen, and it picks up oxygen, transports it to your cells process it, return carbon dioxide through the blood system back to your lungs where you exhale it. So you bring in oxygen, you get rid of carbon dioxide, not carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide. Well, carbon monoxide, it ties up those oxygen receptors to the point where your blood cells cannot pick up those oxygen molecules they need, and basically you suffocate at a cellular level. It just blocks those receptors, and your blood would rather actually pick up the carbon monoxide than it would the oxygen, so that's a bad thing. So anyway, that was my first story, but let me tell you a little bit more about what we did in that class. Well, there's a couple factors to that. First of all, carbon monoxide is an odorless, tasteless, colorless gas. You cannot detect it unless you have specialized equipment. And back in those days, on that first call, we didn't even have the equipment to check for it. That actually had to be done by the gas company. We didn't have the meters at the time were pretty expensive. We didn't have them, and so we'd have to call the gas company guys out. And I think they only had 1 or 2 of them at the time. Now we carry them on every engine. The gas company guys carry them on every truck, and the technology is a whole lot different. the carboxyhemoglobin tests. Like I say, at the time, we couldn't even test at the local hospital. Well, then they finally got the equipment to do it here. Well, nowadays, the technology is such, they actually carry the equipment on the fire truck. The paramedics can test people on the spot to see if they have elevated carboxyhemoglobin levels. And now that's something that came on after I retired from patient fire, and that's a pretty trick that they can do that. But anyway, getting back to what I was saying about carbon monoxide is colorless, odorless, tasteless. But what can happen is frequently, if it's a result of a bad furnace, then there are other gases that come along with it. And the combination of the carbon monoxide and the other companion gases that are given off by a bad furnace are what's commonly referred to as stack gas. You can smell stack gas. If you walk in from the outside, from the fresh air, and you walk into a place that's got a bad furnace, if you're paying attention, the first couple of breaths that you take, you can smell that stack gas. But what happens is then it dulls your sense of smell. And so if you don't smell it in the first couple of breaths, you don't smell it anymore. Well, what happens with paramedics when they come in? What do they do when they walk in the house? Well, the first thing they're doing is they're looking for the patient. They're focused on the patient. They aren't thinking about the surroundings. And so as a result, a lot of times they'll miss that. Well, a lot of times when I would be the duty chief, and if we had a call that sounded like it might be a gas call, I would tag along. And a lot of times I'd get there a couple minutes after the unit got there. So I'd come walking in the door. They're already contacted the patient. They've already started getting history and initiating treatment. And a lot of times I'd stand in the doorway and survey the scene. And there was a number of things I'd be looking at. I'd be looking for anything that might be a risk, a hazard to my crew. I'd also be looking for general safety items, but I'd also be paying attention to what I smell. And there have been quite a few times that I'd walk into a place after the crew was already there, and I'd get that whiff of stack gas. And so after they got the patients loaded up in the ambulance and got ready to transport, I'd just kind of tap the captain on the shoulder and say, check the furnace. I think there's a furnace component to this. Well, there's another thing about carbon monoxide, and there's a segment of the population that is very, very susceptible to the effects of carbon monoxide. And that segment of the population is unborn children. So when we get a call involving somebody who is pregnant, a carbon monoxide related call, we would absolutely make sure that they knew that they needed to follow up on that with the baby. Because carbon monoxide exposure to the mom can cause brain damage in an unborn child. So we had a call like that one night, and the gal was like 8 months pregnant. And what that one turned out to be is they'd had a little trouble with their furnace. And when they got it lit again, because the pilot light kept going out, when they got it lit again and got it working, they didn't put the cover back on it. Well, the covers on furnaces, on a lot of them, they are designed specifically to keep the combustion gas from the burner away from the fresh air inlet that brings the heated air throughout the house, the return air. And in this particular case, they left that cover off, so it was drawing the combustion air back into the return air and circulating it through the house. And they were both sick, and they both got transported to the hospital, and we followed up with them for quite a while, and the baby was born, and the baby did not seem to have any lingering after effects, and everybody breathed a big sigh of relief after that. But that's another real important thing about carbon monoxide calls. Let me tell you about a third one, and that was another one where we were called to an ill child during heating season, and because of the way the call went in, I went ahead and tagged along on it, and once again, I got there a little bit after the unit did, and they were already treating the children. There was 3 children, and all 3 of them were sick with the same symptoms. And that's a clue. Well, when I walked in the door, I smelled the stack gas, and so I mentioned it after they got the patients packaged up. I mentioned it to the captain. I said, hey, check on this, check on the furnace. I think there might be a furnace problem here, and that might be the deal. Well, the captain said, well, the parents aren't sick. It's just the children. I said, well, maybe it has something to do with their bedroom. So anyway, make a long story short, or short story long as I talk. But anyway, what we had there is the parents like a cold bedroom. So they slept with their door closed and their window open. And so their bedroom was like 30 degrees colder than the rest of the house. And yes, it turned out to be a separation and a flue pipe on a gas furnace. And yes, their 3 children were all suffering the effects of carbon monoxide exposure. I got one more I'm going to tell you about. Hope this thing hasn't gotten all too long, but we got a call on a death investigation. And it's actually not too far from my house where I live. And we went over to the house, and it was a house with a daylight basement with a garage underneath and main floor, a hillside home. And it turned out I knew the guy. And he lived by himself. His wife had died quite a number of years earlier. And the reason why I knew him is he had a late 70s Chevy Silverado pickup, a square body Silverado, and it was that caramel color with the tan insert or white insert in the side. That was very, very common in the day, and he kept that thing show quality, and that was absolutely his pride and joy. And he had a big old Irish setter dog, and he and that dog would be riding around. And we'd see him around town and all that kind of stuff. Always had a wave for him and always tell him how nice his truck was. And that truck was his pride and joy. Well, we got dispatched over to his house, and we found him. He was deceased in the living room, sitting on the couch. The dog was laying on the couch next to him. The dog was dead as well. And it had been a little while. It was not a pleasant sight. Well, we got to looking around along with the police investigators. And there was absolutely nothing we could do. The paramedics, the paramedics can do a lot of things, but they can't bring somebody back from the dead. Once in a while they can, but this person had been dead long enough. There was no way anybody was going to bring him back. So it was an investigative case. So we had meters at that time. We checked, and yes, there was high levels of carbon monoxide in the house. We were all in breathing apparatus initially. We opened up the house and set up fans and aired the place out. And so in looking around, we went down to the basement, and there's his truck in the basement. Well, we looked at the truck. Key was on. Gas tank was empty. Battery was dead. Apparently, what he'd end up doing is he decided that to end his life, and the way he decided to end his life is he deliberately left his truck run in the basement garage. And he and his dog curled up on the sofa in the living room and just sat there and waited till the carbon monoxide got him. And I was trying to remember whether or not there ended up being some kind of a note involved in that, and I don't recall a note. But ultimately, the police detectives ruled it a suicide. The truck had unlike this incident I told you about at the beginning of the video in Scottsdale, this truck had fairly loud exhaust. I don't think there was any way that he could have possibly not known it was running or accidentally left it running in the garage. We're pretty sure that it probably was deliberate and that he just decided to end his life that way. Real sad. I try not to dwell on sad cases, but I know there are many of them that we dealt with, and some of the stories need to be told. So I think that's a number of stories in the carbon monoxide file today. As I always tell you, take care of each other, love each other. Take care of yourself. Pay attention to your heating system. The old furnaces, there's a lot of things can go wrong with them. And they call carbon monoxide the silent killer, and they call it that for a reason. So I'm going to let you go for now. I'll give you one, turn it right around here so I can see the button. You can see the blue sky, my trees. Just a pretty day, and we'll talk to you again another time. Peace out.